How? How did it come to this? How did this happen? I can't believe this is real. I can't believe I am actually in a stupid hotel with no internet connection the day before the new season of Castlevania comes out. I've been waiting for this for an entire year, and now I am stuck with no way to watch it. Great. Now what am I supposed to do for the rest of the month?
You should work on your novel.
Nah, I kind of hit a bad case of writer's block on that thing. I don't really know where to take the characters next, or what their driving motivations are supposed to be. Plus, every single time that I try writing more of it, my head starts hurting, I black out, and I wake up holding this. Where did I even get this from? Ugh. No, you know what we're actually going to do? If I can't watch the new season of Castlevania, I loaded my computer up with a ton of cartoons before I left. So what we're going to end up doing is I am going to look through them all, and we're going to find the best cartoon to watch on Halloween. But before we do any of that, a few ground rules. Stop that! First rule is that these are all actual series, not movies and not one-time-a-year specials. So no Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, no Hotel Transylvania, and no Simpsons or regular show Halloween specials. Also, no anime. Not that I have anything against anime. If you've watched this channel for long enough, then you know that I don't. I'm actually a big anime fan. But there's so many animes out there that would make for a great Halloween viewing experience that I could easily just give them their own list. And maybe we might end up doing that next year. So for now, I'm just going to leave anime off the table in order to help simplify our selection. Also, I'm only looking at all ages cartoons here just to make sure that I'm not leaving anyone out with a recommendation. So no Castlevania and no other mature rated series. Now, before we get into our top 10 list, a few, well, normally I'd call them honorable mentions, but instead I'm going to call them oddball mentions because, yeah, there's no shortage of truly bizarre supernatural cartoons out there. So before I get to the actual top 10, let's talk about a few of the weirder contenders who we still can't believe actually existed. Count Duckula. It's the story of a vampire duck whose servants attempted to resurrect him only for the ritual to go wrong, so he came back as a vampire who will only eat vegetables. I've gotta give him some points for creativity on this one. I mean, I never would have thought of a show like that, but the reason why I still wanted to bring it up is because if you want something that will get you in the Halloween mood, just watch the first 10 seconds of this theme song.
This does not suffice, however, for they may be brought back to life by means of a secret rite that can be performed once a century.
Seriously, how did something like that make it into a children's cartoon about a vegan duck? Gravedale High. It's the classic story of a group of delinquent students who everyone else has given up on except for one teacher who believes in them. Except that the students are all monsters and the teacher is a human played by Rick Moranis. And I don't mean that as a joke because the character looks and acts like Rick Moranis. No, that's actually Rick Moranis. Listen, this show was not good. The characters are all one jokes and they hammer them in way too hard and you're going to get sick of them before the first episode is over with. But it's still worth checking out just to say, wait, this was real? Groovy Ghoulies. This show probably aged more poorly than anything else on this list because wow, is it set in the late 60s, early 70s. It's basically a sketch comedy show featuring Frankenstein, Dracula, and a hippie werewolf in the same tone as Laugh-In. This is another show that there's honestly no way that I could call it good, but it is rather fascinating to watch. Maybe it's the retro flavor that everything has, and if you watch it with a modern day point of view, it just seems like some weird relic of the past, or maybe it's just the fact that I've never seen a werewolf say something like this.
Come on, Drag Baby! Man, I'll teach you how to hang 10!
Monster Force. Monster Force was a short-lived toy commercial, cartoon, that was basically G.I. Joe except replaced Cobra with Dracula. Again, this show wasn't good, but there actually are a lot of winks and nods in here to longtime monster fans that will make you perk up and catch your attention. Also, yeah man, it's G.I. Joe with monsters. On some level, I kinda do love that premise. Speaking of rip-off cartoons trying to take whatever else was popular at the time to get a toy line out of it, Mummies Alive. This was another series trying to rip off every other show that was popular in the early 90s. Problem is, it came out in the late 90s. Yeah, it kind of missed the boat with its premise, but I do have to give it some points because even though 90% of this show looked cheap, man, they spent their money on the transformation sequences. I think about 3/4 of their budget went into making these 10 seconds of each show actually look good. And lastly, Inhumanoids. This was another Hasbro property that, yes, was made to sell toys, but I have to give this series credit because even though it only ran for one season, it was very different from most other shows out there at the time for two reasons. One is it actually felt like this show was building to something rather than just random standalone episodes every single week, and two, this show was terrifying. The villain of the series was basically Satan, and one of the villains could transform humans, including the heroes that we were following, into giant, twisted, mutated monsters just by touching them while he shrieked out the words, "Decompose!" That was nightmare fuel to a kid. Inhumanoids truly was something different. However, I can't put it in the top 10 because it is next to impossible to find this show. The DVDs are all gone, it's not streaming anywhere, I couldn't even find clips of it on YouTube. I found full episodes of Groovy Ghoulies and Gravedale High, but I can't find more than 30 seconds of this show. Hasbro is trying to bury this thing and pretend like it never happened, and I have no idea why. With how many great creepy shows have come out for kids in the past couple years, they could totally try to embrace this again. Heck, they keep talking about making a Hasbro shared universe with G.I. Joe and Transformers and the Micronauts and ROM. You're going to need a villain for all those characters to face, and the Inhumanoids are kind of your best choice. You know what, maybe we'll do a pitching in on this someday, but for now, let's get into the official number 10 spot. Number 10, Addams Family. I grew up a big fan of the original Addams Family TV show, but when it came to the movies, I was a bit back and forth on them. So if I had to pick a real spiritual successor to the classic TV series, I actually really enjoyed the animated show. It basically took the wacky hijinks of the original series, but instead of constantly referencing crazy stuff happening off screen because they didn't have the budget to do any of it, they could actually show it now. And the voice cast really nailed each of these characters, including Jim Cummings as Lurch, Rip Taylor as Uncle Fester, and John Astin, the original Gomez, returning to this role. If you've never watched the original Addams Family, then, well, go and watch that show first. It was actually really good. But after you've watched this is a pretty strong continuation. Number 9, Over the Garden Wall. I know a lot of people are going to be upset that this one is so low on the list, but I'll get to why it's down here in just a second. For now, let's talk about why it does make it into the top 10. This show has an amazing style to it, but an even better tone. It's about two brothers lost in the woods trying to get home, and you never really know where they are or when this is set. It could be anywhere between the 1600s and the 1800s, and when this show wants to get creepy, it perfectly matches those eras of horror, which is something you almost never see in any medium, let alone cartoons. It almost feels like a fairy tale, like the type of story that you would tell your kids to remind them why they shouldn't go out into the woods, and the big villain of the whole series is perfectly haunting and one of the best villains of any show on this list. However, there's several episodes that don't really match the spooky or supernatural tone that I was going for with this list. Not that they're bad, they're just not the kind of thing that I would associate with Halloween. So yes, this show is brilliant all throughout, but it's not a great Halloween cartoon all throughout. But that being said, when this show is trying to be spooky, it nails it. Number 8, Beetlejuice. Unlike the Addams Family cartoon, which attempted to be a spiritual successor to the show it was based on, the Beetlejuice cartoon went in a totally different direction from the source material, with Beetlejuice now being kind of Lydia's party animal friend who always wanted to show her a good time and take her on wacky adventures. But even with that massive character shift, this show still nails the humor of the movie, and I'll say that Stephen Ouimet is actually just as perfect for this character as Michael Keaton was. And I went back and watched a lot of these cartoons when deciding their order on this list, and I was shocked that I still actually got a good chuckle here and there from this show. Number 7, Real Monsters. Anyone from my generation probably remembers this show very fondly, but sadly I think it's being lost to the sands of time. So allow me to tell you about the greatest spooky monster show from the 90s. That's right, you heard me bump in the night. Take that second place trophy and get out. This was a show about a school where monsters learned how to scare humans, which is a great concept all on its own, but the cast of characters in this series is what made it so special. Everyone had such memorable designs and big personalities that made them stand out, and the show was super creative. They took the kind of stories that you'd see in a regular high school dramedy and then morphed them to revolve around monsters. Not an easy feat, but this show nailed it every single episode. Number 6, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Alright, I'll admit, this one might be getting this high just from my own personal taste, because this show cracked me up when I was younger. But I actually think that The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is one of the smartest examples of dark humor that I've ever seen in a cartoon. This show was never afraid to push the envelope, which makes sense considering that the show's premise is that it's all about a cold, black-hearted girl named Mandy and her dim-witted pawn/friend Billy beating the Grim Reaper in a game, so he is now forced to be their friend forever. I was constantly shocked at the jokes that they were able to get away with, and at how many of these jokes consistently made me burst out laughing. I will admit, this show may have one of my favorite running gags of any cartoon I've ever seen.
They want to be the dominant species on the planet, and they'll destroy us all to make it happen! Destroy us all! 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 I'll take the chicken. Destroy us all!
And if you're a big horror fan who wants to get in the mood for Halloween, this show is a buffet for you. They had parodies of Ash Williams, Snake Plissken, The Blob. They did a whole episode dedicated to Cthulhu, each of which with their own unique, goofy twist. And their version of Dracula is easily one of the best interpretations of the character ever.
I didn't know you could turn into a bear. Woman, everybody know Dracula turned into a bear. That's what Dracula do. I'm sorry, honey, baby. Dracula sorry too. Sorry you so old and ugly now.
Number 5, Mystery Incorporated. I had to put at least one Scooby-Doo show on this list because it's probably the most iconic spooky cartoon in American history. However, real talk, I was never the biggest fan of Scooby-Doo. I watched it as a kid because it was on, but that was about it. However, Mystery Incorporated was the first time I ever watched a Scooby-Doo cartoon and actually got invested in it. It took these characters and played up all the jokes surrounding them in a way that was very pleasing to the fans, but then it actually tried to give them depth. We actually got to know their families, their personal struggles, how the town felt about these crazy kids running around solving crimes. It was the first Scooby-Doo cartoon that actually felt like it wasn't just here for jokes, but like they were actually trying to develop a much larger story. And the cherry on top of all that is that there was actually a huge mystery surrounding the town that the gang lived in, and that mystery developed throughout the course of the entire series, creating sequential storylines that actually built up from episode to episode that really got me hooked on the show. So, if I had to pick just one Scooby-Doo show to put on this list, it would have to be the one that actually made me a Scooby-Doo fan. Number 4, Gargoyles. Okay, I know someone is going to say, this shouldn't count as a spooky cartoon to watch for Halloween, but you know something? It's got monsters as the heroes who fight witches and dark gods and mutants, and they can only come out at night, so you know something? I'm counting it. This show was years ahead of its time. It had rich, fully developed characters, storylines that weren't afraid to build up over the course of whole seasons, massive twists and character turns, morally gray characters who were evil but you could totally understand their backgrounds, truckloads of creativity behind it, and one of the best voice cast of any show on this list. Jonathan Frakes as the cold-hearted Xanathos, Ed Asner as the kind old Hudson, and Keith freaking David as Goliath. You couldn't have picked better actors for these roles. Number 3.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage the Cowardly Dog!
Courage the Cowardly Dog is one of the smartest, most emotional, and honestly healthiest cartoons I've ever seen. It's about a dog who has to protect his owner from all the evil ghouls and monsters and spirits that haunt their farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and not only is Courage such a lovable character, but the show is all about overcoming your fears, dealing with self-esteem issues, dealing with abuse, mental health, anxiety, and so much more, but it's always played very subtly. They never made sure to overplay their hand on any of these issues. They put these themes into the show just enough so that it would have an impact on you, but you wouldn't even realize that Courage was teaching you these lessons until years down the road. And these days, there's plenty of cartoons like that. Adventure Time, Steven Universe, there's several shows out there that are not afraid to tackle big issues like this, but Courage came out more than a decade before any of them, making it truly a groundbreaking series.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
Number 2, Gravity Falls. I've talked about Gravity Falls a lot on this channel, and for good reason. It's brilliant. Twins Dipper and Mabel go to live with their great uncle Stan, a con artist who runs a tourist trap in Oregon, only to find out that the town of Gravity Falls holds several secrets around every corner. This series was a great combination of Twin Peaks, The Twilight Zone, Goosebumps, Outer Limits, all rolled up in a huge mystery that captured their audience by storm, causing us to read messages backwards and freeze frame on the smallest moments to try and piece together any clue that we possibly could. Spectacular characters, hilarious jokes, and one of the best ongoing stories of any television show in years. The only reason why it's not the number 1 cartoon on this list is simply because, again, this is stuff to watch on Halloween, and about half these episodes are perfect for that. But the other half don't really match the tone of the season all that well, and again, this is one of those shows where you really do need to watch one episode after another. You can't really just pick and choose the ones that you want to check out. But don't get me wrong, even though it's at the number 2 spot, objectively speaking, it's the best show on this list. If you have never checked out Gravity Falls, there is no excuse for not finally checking it out this Halloween. And at the number 1 spot, the perfect cartoon to watch on Halloween is of course the cartoon that answers the age-old question, who you gonna call? It's the Real Ghostbusters. After the success of the classic paranormal comedy, Real Ghostbusters took everything that movie had set up and ran with it. This series could easily have been a quick cash grab, just, hey, kids like Ghostbusters, let's crank out anything with their name on and they'll throw money at us. And sure, that was the objective of the producers, but the writers they hired on this series didn't just care about turning out something good with versions of these characters that were, sure, a bit more exaggerated for this new medium, but still captured what we loved about them in the movie. No, they also wanted to tell deep stories, much deeper than what we were getting from most cartoons at the time. There were actually several episodes that explored different sides to these characters that hadn't been touched on in the films. Heck, I'd even be willing to say that with some of these characters, the versions most fans remember of them is the cartoon version. But most importantly, they wanted to get creative with this series, and that's why it's the number 1 cartoon on our list. This was a children's cartoon where they had the Ghostbusters go up against actual mythological creatures, monsters from classic stories, deities from ancient religions. Heck, they actually had them fight Cthulhu in an episode, and I know I said that the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy did the same thing, but they had to turn that into a really goofy joke. In the Real Ghostbusters, they had him still be a threat. They put the works of H.P. Lovecraft into a series for kids, and they actually made it work. In fact, the monsters in this show were so good and the series was so creative that almost 2 decades after the series went off the air, they still put out there a complete guide to all the creatures that popped up in this show because that's how much it meant to all the fans. Also, I totally own it and it's amazing. I love this thing. This series wasn't afraid to be creative. It wasn't afraid to be weird, and it wasn't afraid to be scary. Heck, the episode with the boogeyman actually really terrified me as a kid. And out of all the shows on this list, I'd be more than willing to say it's got the best collection of monsters. Now, just whatever you do, make sure that if you decide to check out this show that you watch the real Ghostbusters and not the original Ghostbusters. And especially, do not watch what this show ended up becoming in its later seasons when the producers got tired of the writers not following their instructions and fired them all and turned the show into Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. Yeah, for anybody out there who wonders why Gravity Falls decided to call it quits after only 2 seasons, look and see what ended up becoming of this amazing series. It's a fate far worse than cancellation. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was our #1 cartoon to check out on Halloween. Let me know your personal pick in the comments down below, especially if it's something that we didn't even cover on today's episode. I'm always looking for good, creepy cartoons that I've never even heard of, so let me know your pick in the comments down below, or on the internet, when I finally get that working again, at Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm still stuck in this place for another week, so I'm just going to try and keep my mind busy. I'm going to try and remain focused on something else aside from this creepy hotel and the preposterous number of axes that are just lying everywhere. So I'm going to go back to working on my novel. Let's do this. It was the best of times. It was, no, someone else has already used that. All right, no, not that. Call me ish. Wait, I think that's the exact same book. Nope. Okay, hold on. Oh wait, I've got it now. Oh, I am on a roll now. Great American novel. Look out, here I come. Wait, this is all trash. Deleting it all. Perfect. Here we go. Writing process at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do this. All right.